Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the YouTube channel grecochess, the channel of the game of chess. In this video, I'm currently in Parsippany, New Jersey, participating in the USATE 2026 Championship, that is the United States Amateur Team East. And in this video, I'm going to show to you what happened in round number one. But first, let's share some details. And here we are. Each 6-round tournament, you see the schedule, 2 rounds today, February 14th, 1 and 7:30. 2 rounds on Saturday, 2 rounds tomorrow, Sunday, and then 2 rounds on Monday. In the rounds, you have teams of 4 players competing against each other. Time control, you see here, it is 40-100 ST30 delay 5. What does this mean? It means that when the game starts, the players have 100 minutes on their clocks, 1 hour 40 minutes. When it's time to play, for the first 5 seconds, the delay does not move, then it continues going downwards. They must complete 40 moves before the clock goes down to 0. If they do so, they get extra 30 minutes, and once again, when it's their turn to play, for the first 5 seconds, the clock does not move. And now, what was the team I was representing, I was participating? The team is called the Gov't Closed Opening, and in board number 1 is Brian Lawson with a rating of 2000. Board number 2 is Alan Cantor with a rating of 2000. Board number 3 is the captain of our team, Jake Kleinman, with a rating of 1814. And number 4, it's myself, 1551 it is here, although officially it has gone up to 1631. And when I registered, it was 1551. But since then, it has fallen a little bit down to 1604. 1604 is my most recent rating. Round number 1. Who was our opponent? The team is called the 4 Nights No Sleep. And you see here, in round number 4, I was facing Han Leqi with a rating of 1945. This means that I was at least, depending how you count it, at least 300 points rated lower than him. So clearly he was the favorite. I had the white pieces and he had the black. And let's see what happened. We're going to the chess analysis board and we'll do it the way we always do it. I'm going to enter from the score sheet the moves, and computer will make a comment about the move. We'll also show the evaluation with positive number means white is doing better, black is doing better. We'll show whether the move was the best, and if not, which move would have been the best, and what are the top 5 options for the player whose turn is to come. And let's start. With the white pieces, I start by placing my pawn to e4. My opponent places a defense. The pawn goes to c5. Book moves you see here, that's what this little booklet means here, meaning they have been analyzed extensively in opening theory. My knight goes to c3, second move. This is what's called the closest salient defense. My opponent replies with the pawn going to e6. My next move, my knight goes to f3. This is what's called the Sicilian defense French variation. And my opponent, let's see, places his pawn to a6. The pawn goes to d4. Have 2 pawns in the center. Let's see, we'll take it, and I'll take it back with my knight. And he places his queen to c7. And at this point, we completed the first 5 moves, all of the book moves, and I have a small advantage of 0.43, which basically means nothing. We just followed opening theory. I have a small advantage because I started with white. Continue. My bishop goes to e2. Let's see, sends the pawn to b5, hoping for a queenside attack. And I'm trying to stop it with my pawn to a3, so he cannot place the pawn to b4. His idea is if I let him place the pawn to b4, I have to move my knight to c3. My pawn on e4 is unprotected. It's not currently attacked, but it's become very vulnerable, to use the word. And let's see, places his bishop to b7. I place my bishop to f3. to challenge the long diagonal that goes from A8 to H1. Let's see if I can put a nice arrow to show it. Yes. For the time being, he is the one that exerts pressure. They want to take away that pressure by placing my bishop to F3. But at this point, we stop having the book moves. The last book move was the previous one. And now the computer says that my move is good with a check mark. And I'm down a little bit to minus 0.33. Until then, still, let's see, get a small advance, 0.05. Now it becomes a little bit bigger, 0.33. He would like me to push the pawn to F4, but this is, I would say, risky. Pushing the F pawn unnecessarily is always risky. You open the diagonal that goes from H5, from H4 to E1, this diagonal here. That's why I prefer to challenge this long diagonal from A8 to H1. Let's continue. He places his knight to F6. The problem is that my pawn at E4, what's going to happen? It's attacked twice by the bishop and by the knight, defended twice by my knight and by my bishop. If there's a third attacker, the pawn can be lost. For example, what could go wrong? What I was thinking at the time, what if, let's see, could place his pawn to B4, I take it, he places his bishop here, and my knight on C3 is pinned. And the pawn is going to fall if let's see could play again. I really have to spend a lot of time thinking just about the defense of the E4 pawn, which is crucial. A central pawn, I cannot just say it's only a pawn. If I let it go, then my position might collapse. But let's see where are we now. My next position is kingside castling. I was hoping next move to bring the rook to E1 to have a third defense for the pawn. And let's see, places his pawn to D6. This meant that his previous, what I was afraid, meaning exchange pawns and bring the bishop to B4 now becomes impossible. Book moves is a book, meaning that this position has been reached in the past, but through a different order of moves. That's why before it did not appear, and now it appears. My next move, I send my rook to E1, extra protection for the pawn on E4, which is the computer, and he places his bishop to E7. We completed the first 10 moves, and let's see, has a small advantage of 0.11. That means almost nothing. And at this point, I was thinking, and I decided to go with the following idea. My pawn goes to E5. Why? What can let's see do now? In accuracy is the computer. If he decides to exchange, take my bishop, I take his bishop, and then his knight is under threat, is to do something about it, and while he does something, not too many squares to go, by the way, I can take the pawn on D6. But that's not what he did. He went the other way around. He took the pawn on E5, which I expected. Great moves to the computer, I expected it. But my plan later was I take the bishop, and he must take it back. If he takes my knight, if he takes, for example, my knight, I take the rook. I have an extra exchange. Of course, he takes it to the queen, but now that he takes my bishop to the queen, the pawn on E4 is undefended, and I take it with my rook. Which meant that his king is still in the center, my rook is in the center of the board. Of course, it's not the rook that usually goes there, but at least it has a lot of control and pressure there. And he'll have to think, I'm starting to have an initiative, even though the computer at this point thinks that, let's say, he's doing better. He places his knight to D7 and attacks my rook on E5. Of course, I was not going to leave my rook there. What are the safe squares? Either go E3 to E1, or I go to G5. I decided to go to G5 after a lot of thought, because I had other thoughts in my mind. For example, if I put it here, perhaps I might be able to take these 2 pawns for the price of the knight. I send my rook to G5 and attack the pawn on G7. And let's see, what can he do? I was expecting him to castle kingside. And because this would keep his G7 pawn without damaging his pawn structure. He decided instead to move the pawn to G6. I knew then if the rook was not there, my bishop would go to h6. Clearly now, if I move the rook, next move, bishop goes to h6. Computer, you see, suggests that Leqi plays exactly what I was thinking he would play, the kingside castling, not the pawn to g6. Let's go back one move to see how does the computer think. The computer thinks that pawn to g6 would have been his second best option. If I can place my bishop on h6, he cannot castle kingside. Let's see how game continues. First of all, I wanted to save my rook in case the knight would go anywhere, because then we have a discover attack for the rook. Then the rook being on g5 does not allow my bishop to go to h6. So my rook goes down to g3, and Leqi places his rook on d8. This means that he cannot castle queenside no matter what, and if I can place my bishop on h6, he cannot castle at all. Complete the first 15 moves, the game is more or less even. Leqi has an advantage of 0.17. Next thing, what I was afraid, and I wanted to stop it, first of all, his queen at b7 controlled all the diagonal from a8 to h1. And second, if he could place a knight on, for example, a square like f4 or h4, and my rook is not in the g file, there is a threat of checkmate. I wanted to stop any such ideas of him threatening g2, not that I'm going to let him checkmate me, but because I would have to stop anything else to avoid the checkmate. The best way to do it, I thought, was exchange queens. Computer thinks it's an inaccuracy. Would rather have my bishop go to h6 now. Perhaps I had this to do in mind, but at a later time. And let's say he decides to exchange the queens, and after he takes my queen, the question is how to take it back. If I take it back with my rook, the knight on d4 is unprotected, and if his knight on d7 goes anywhere, my knight on d4 is attacked. I decided to take it with my knight, and the computer says, yeah, it's the best move. And I don't have to worry about any unprotected piece, but the problem is that my rook on g3 is very much constrained. If attack doesn't have too many squares to go. And what Leqi is doing is he's placing his knight to c5, opening among other things. First of all, his knight is in a better square, has control of the center of at least the e4 square. And second, his rook has the entire control of the d5. And now I'm sending my bishop to h6. My good idea. Let's see how this can help. Excellent. So the computer, although, would rather have it go to b3 to attack the knight. And let's say he's placing his knight from f6 to e4. Before, when there was this possibility, I said, okay, my knight on c3 will take it, my rook is safe, because I knew my rook was on attack. But when he played at that moment, I realized that he can place his other knight on e4. So things are not so easy as I thought. So that's exactly what happened. If I didn't take the knight, you see that my knight, he would take it and he would double my pawns. You see, if I play the second best move, rook to h3, we exchange and I have double c4s. I didn't like this thing. That's why I said, let's exchange first and then we'll see what happened. And now I have to move my rook. Not too many squares to go. If I went to g5, that was my first thought. Then the pawn goes to f5 and my rook has really nowhere to go. Let's see it again. It might go to, for the time being, to f4, and then the pawn goes, if the rook goes to f4, the pawn goes to e5, and I think that my rook is lost. At best, I might take his knight as an exchange. Cannot go anywhere else. You see, every other square, if it goes g5, it's a bishop, maybe to h3, and so h3 is the only square remaining. So I place it to h3, the only square where my rook is safe. And what did, let's see, do he plays great moves the computer? I'm glad the computer liked it. I didn't like it at all because my rook was too much constrained. And his bishop goes to c5. Another time he was threatening the f2 pawn. We finished the first 20 moves. Leqi is ahead by 0.50. He is doing a little better, but still the game is for grabs. Now I see that my pawn on f2 is under attack. How could I defend it? I saw two moves. Either the bishop goes to e3 and then we exchange, but then I have an isolated e pawn, or my king goes to f1. King to f1 means that if he decides to exchange, I'm going to win his two pieces for a rook and a pawn, which usually is better. After lots of thought, I decided let's first place my rook to f1, thinking that, well, I still need to worry about that, but for the time being, it seems that things go okay. What can he do? The computer says it is a blunder. When I played, I didn't think it was a blunder. I knew that it was not an easy situation. I was in the defensive. But what else could I do? What can let's do? I was thinking if he tries to put his rook to d2, my knight will take it. If he tries to place his rook on d1, my rook will take it. How else can he continue the attack? If he tries to take the f2 pawn, we'll have a combination where he's going to lose his bishop and knight for rook and pawn, which is, even though very little marginal, it's on my favor. And then he plays his knight on f2, and when he did it, I felt good. I take the rook, his bishop takes my rook, my king takes, and so on. But just I was thinking and double checking everything, I showed my horror that things are not so simple. You see that rook taking to f2 is nowhere in the top three moves here. Fortunately, I didn't change my settings, so the computer only shows the top three moves for the other player and not the top five. Hopefully I can change that before I show the next round. But it doesn't matter which way. Now, then to my horror, I saw that if I took the knight, he's not going to take you the bishop. He's going instead to check with the rook. Rook checks here. And then I only have one legal move. Knight goes to e1. Because the rook is pinned, and then rook takes knight in checkmate, meaning if I had to give up the pawn, otherwise in checkmate in two moves so fast. What could I do? I had to forget about the pawn. I'm going to play with the pawn less, and hopefully I may be able to save this game somehow. What I decided to do is the best move the computer. Rook goes to h4, because in addition to everything else, in addition to mathematical threat, I also had my rook on h3 under threat, and not too many squares to go. Can h5, no, cannot go. h6 blocked by the bishop, g3 maybe, but then a discover check. If I send it to g3, look what's going to happen. Knight goes to e4, and due to the discover, I lose the rook. And if I'm going to lose it, why not play something else now? So I decided to play the best move of the computer. Rook goes to h4. And stay with, computer says the best. I stay with the pawn less and see what I can do, because I have won games that I was down much more than just the pawn. And he places his rook on g8. Why? His rook on h8 or in g8 now is isolated. He's leaving the h7 protected, meaning if I could place my bishop anywhere, I'm threatening the pawn on h7. And maybe if I even put it on g5, somehow I could have a double attack both the rook on d8 and the pawn on h7. That was my idea in my mind, that was thinking. But first of all, what I wanted to avoid is a discover check where I lose my pawn, meaning if I let him check with a knight, whether from e4 or c1, next move I'm losing the b2 pawn, and the result is I'm not down one pawn but two pawns. Let me think what would happen if I place my bishop on g5. Then he would do the discover. He would take my bishop. I'll take here. And he would have a strong attack. I decided to make it impossible for him to check now, to do the discover check, or he could do it, but he would lose his bishop if he decided to do now the discover, unless of course he did the double check to h3, but then he attacks nothing. If he did any other discover check, I'm winning the bishop. And my rooks are well protected, so even if he takes the rook, I'll take also the knight. And he decided he was thinking to send his bishop to a7 or b6. He touched his bishop and he was oscillating between a7 and b6 because his bishop had to stay in this diagonal. No other square it could go, otherwise I'm winning the knight. Finally, he decided to send the bishop to b6. And now, what I wanted is what is called Luft. Because if I could create a square for my king that it could go, then I wouldn't have to worry about my rook take the knight. So I sent my pawn to g3. This meant that there was a danger for him, meaning the hope for me. Next move, rook goes here, and then his rook cannot go here like before, king goes here. Then what would happen is that he would have basically to use the bishop. After my rook takes here, his bishop takes here, my king goes here, and I want 2 pieces for the rook. I doubt that he would do it. I'm not sure he would see it, but at least I make life a little easier for me. What did, let's say, play? He pushed his pawn to g5. And I was thinking that his pawn, I attack it 3 times with bishop. Excuse me, I attack it twice with bishop and with knight. And he's defending only once the rook. So he could take it with either bishop or the knight, but then he would do the discover check going now to e4 and then win whichever piece I had. Of course, I could take it back with the other piece, but then his rook would finally make the last move and he would end up winning a piece for a pawn. There would be a whole piece down. This way I could not take it, and not only that, I had to find a way to save my rook on g4, not easy one to do it. And where can my rook go? It cannot go to h3, it will be taken by the knight. If it goes to g5, it will be taken by the knight. Excuse me, it go to g4, it will be taken by the knight, f4 by the pawn, e4 by the knight, d4 by the bishop, and c4 by the pawn on b5. So my rook goes to the only square it was feeling safe, to h5. By elimination, as if I had any other choice. I hate it when I had to play unique move because every other move is bad, not because I like this move. My rook on h5 basically has nowhere to go. It's safe for now, but well, at least I'm attacking the g5 pawn 3 times. And it's defended only once by the rook. And I was starting having some hope if I win that pawn, I may be back. And what he decided to do is send his rook to d1. And we finished 25 moves. Computer doesn't think it's the best. Would rather have his knight go to g4 and then perhaps win my bishop on h6. But after 25 moves, even though that was not his best move, he's ahead by 2.88. Now, I had 2 choices basically, either to exchange rooks or do nothing. If I did nothing, I was afraid that if he could have checks that my king would not stay, because currently my king is the only thing protecting the knight. If he could start with the, for example, double check, and my king had to start moving, and eventually it would not be next to f1, then I might lose my rook. So I felt that instead of having to fight to keep my rook alive, let's exchange it and remove one attacking piece for Let's see. The rook goes to d1. And no surprise, of course, his next move was his knight takes my rook and discover check. Where can I put my king? I was afraid if I put it on g2 or f1, his knight would go to e3 check and then win my pawn at c2. And now he's ahead by 2 pawns. And the only way to avoid such possibility is to place my king on h1, and that's what I did. If you check me from f1, at least there's no pawn that he can threaten. And now he plays a move that, oh, this is surprised me. I was a little bit worried about it. Pawn to f6. So now my hopes for winning the g5 pawn are lost. What can I do? I wanted to give some space because both my bishop and my rook were, what can I say, terrible squares. If his king could go to f7 and g6, if I place my rook on h3, for example, which would be safe, then we have a wonderful fork and I lose the rook. Let's open the position because the way things are going, in a few moves, I'm going to lose at least one of the bishop or rook, if not both. So what to do? Pawn goes to h4. What else could I do? Inaccuracy is the computer. Imagine the computer thinks my best move would be bishop takes to g5. Let's follow it. What would happen? You see bishop, he takes it, and I'm down a whole piece. I can take a pawn, okay, I'm down a piece for a pawn. He looked to gx. Look at here, this little chessboard on the right. How does it show things? And I would be down by 3.42. So no, I didn't want to be down a whole piece. That's why pawn goes to h4 as I said before. And he takes it, surprise with the g pawn. The question is how to take it back. I had 3 ways to take it back. With the knight, with the rook, or with the pawn. The problem with the first 2 ways is that he could take the pawn on g3, and I would be in a very, very tough spot to pull it madly. It would be down 2 pawns. So in order at least to avoid losing the extra pawn, I take it with my pawn. Inaccuracy is the computer. Computer would rather have me not take it at all. I'm down now by 6.64, you see? The things are going from bad to worse. And he checks me with the knight on f2. Then I saw it. I only had one legal move. No time to think of anything because the rook on g8 is controlling the entire g file. Of course, had I let him take the pawn on g3, he would still do it, but he would be maybe one move a little bit slower, but he would have 2 extra pawns. You see, in the material, I'm down by only 1 pawn. Of course, he has a huge advantage. If all pieces disappeared, his e and f pawn, look at them here. They double pass connected pawns, but they're too far away from promotion. So if I could survive to the ending, I might have a chance. Of course, let's play the only move since there was no other move, king to h2. And then his bishop goes to c7 with a check. The move number 30, we finished 30 moves, then his advance is to 6.91. And then I saw it that my king was out of squares. My king could go neither to h1 or to h3 because of the knight, or to any of the g pawns, meaning g3, g2, g1 because of the rook. The only way to postpone a little bit a terrible situation was place my knight on e5. Because if I place my bishop on f4, it would be made. Bishop on f4, exactly. You see it here, means that his bishop goes to f4 made. So I can place either the knight or the rook, not that it makes any difference. I place the knight here. And surprise, surprise, he got it. And my only legal move now is, no, I have 2 legal moves, but bishop f4 means mate. So I place my rook here. And instead of taking the pawn as I was expecting, he just creates a fork with his knight on g4. And at this point, I resigned. Let's say congratulations for your win. I'm not sure how the other players did in the match we're facing, but we'll tell you later because my game was the first one to end. And let's give a look at the review. Let's wait and see. Fortunately, the Wi-Fi here is a little bit slow, so it'll take some time. It came, yes. I had to face an opponent who's, believe it or not, he played with 96.1 accuracy. Usually only grandmasters play that well, and 86.5 was my accuracy, quite high enough for me. And we played as if, let's take a look now. Our ratings was 2300 for me. Wow, this makes me international master. His was 2500 grandmaster. Although I've told you that I don't trust too much this one, they're too flattering. Let's see the specifics. No brilliances, two great moves each of us. Book 8 versus 7 for, let's see. And best 15 versus 10 for let's see. Excellent 3 versus 2 for me. Good 4 versus 3 for me. Inaccuracies 4 for me, 2 for let's see, and 1 blunder. My blunder was my 21st move, when I placed my rook from a1 to f1 to avoid losing the pawn on f2, if you remember, because his knight and his bishop were attacking it. The computer thinks that all my best moves were to give up the pawn and try to have counterplay somewhere else. This completes the first round. I'm going to see now if there is any results of the other games in the WhatsApp on my phone, because they created a group about this tournament. I want to see if the results have been posted. Fortunately, I got too many notifications for everyone joining this group, so yeah, well. I don't see the results anywhere. We now to return to the playing area for the next round. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. Thanks to all the viewers, the subscribers, the comments and the likes. This is grecochess channel. We are at the USATE chess tournament in Parsippany, New Jersey. Thanks everybody. Goodbye.